Good morning and welcome to TBRCon 2025. What makes a good dystopian fantasy? Good morning and welcome to TBRCon 2025. What makes a good dystopian fantasy? My name is Beth Tabler. I'm the editor of Grimdark Magazine and the owner of Before We Go blog. And I am so happy to be discussing this with you all today. This is one of my favorite subgenres of speculative fantasy. I would love our panelists to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about what they have going on. So DB, why don't you start?
Hello, I'm DB Rook. I'm the author of Callous and Crow, which is a very dystopian genre mashup of Western steampunk with a bit of horror. And I'm knee-deep in the sequel as we speak. I'm also part of the Four Beardsmen of the Book Apocalypse podcast, and I do review for FanFiAddict.
Wonderful. Shelly, go ahead.
Hi, my name's Shelly Campbell. My debut was a book called Under the Lesser Moon. It's a duology that's been completed, and it is all about a dystopia, but in a Stone Age setting with dragons. And I've got about enough novels that I'm losing count. 7 novels right now. I've got a couple other ones in a series that are all about dystopia, more sci-fi, but like end of the world in Canada. So Hunger Games, but less violent because it's Canada.
There you go. Jay?
Is that me? Sorry, I lost the signal. I am Jay Hannaford. I'm author of The Skin and the Pact, and I didn't really realize I was writing a dystopia until everybody read it and went, that was dystopian. I'm like, okay, because I thought I was writing an alternative future, which happens to be dystopian. So yeah, but yeah, that's what I'm writing at the moment is pretty much starts out completely the opposite. It's almost utopian in the beginning. So yeah, I like to mix things up.
Jason, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing. I should probably put some headphones in. Jason Clark, I'm the author of the Training Ground series. It's a trilogy. It's fantasy, sci-fi, dystopian, kind of the same thing. I didn't really set out intending to write a dystopian, but it kind of went that way. But yeah, I just finished the trilogy the end of last year. So yeah, that's what I have going on.
Cool. And Mars.
Well, I also started writing something that I didn't know was dystopia and didn't know that it was grimdark until it ended up falling under that category, right? It was just trying to do some like a very cool, badass kind of anti-hero, and it turned into kind of a dystopian world and all that. So I'm pretty much in that camp. I have a trilogy. This is book 1. The trilogy is already out, and then I have another book which is a standalone, and it's like Shay said, I have like a utopian one that ends up kind of not being so utopian and kind of more of a dystopian too. So I think if we are broad with the definition, a lot of things will end up falling in that dystopian category too, right?
So I think the first big question is defining what a dystopia is. Generally, what do you guys think a dystopia is? How do we turn that to an audience?
I was thinking about that, like when I was getting into the mindset for this panel, and I think that usually dystopian sci-fi, that it's more like future in future society, something like that. Dystopian fantasy could be more like dystopia in the past or an alternate reality. And I was started thinking about all the books that would fit in there, right? But I think that the definition should have to do with the society, right? Not that necessarily that there has to have been like a cataclysm or an apocalypse or whatever. It has to do with the society needs to be dystopian. Just like utopia has to do with the society, dystopia should also have like an alternate society that has somehow gone wrong in some way. So it could be something like the Hunger Games, which is like future but not so future, or 1984, which is now in the past actually, but it was the future at the time. Or it could be something like a regular like fantasy world that slowly descended into like a very bad, dark or grim, dark history. So I'm thinking a lot of things can totally fit into that, as long as there's a twist on society. It's that it's different to current society, or it's different to like a past society that we imagine from, like, I don't know, from the past, from medieval books or whatever. That's my definition that I'm working on.
Anybody else?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
After you, go for it.
I was just going to say, I think when I look at dystopian, I think of something has changed, and sometimes it may appear that it's changed for the better, but typically it's something that we in our current society and our current set of morals, like, we wouldn't agree with. And so I look at it as things have changed, it's gone sideways, and we want the characters to change it back or change it in general.
I think that there has to be.
Oh, TB, go ahead.
You went in first.
I was just going to say that there has to be some kind of backbone of utopia, so that there's whatever sort of went wrong, whatever society failed at or didn't achieve, for it to have become the dystopia. So there has to be some kind of version of where people wanted the world or the setting to go that didn't achieve that, for it to become dystopian.
Yeah,
Jenny?
That's kind of where I was going to go. That past or alternate vision has to be, to me, embedded into the story as well. That what was there makes the reflection of what is there now that disproportionately darker or worse or problematic for the individuals that are there. Not necessarily that it's a cause of society and fantasy. Obviously, it's quite often it can be through other things. It could be through disease, through some sort of fantasy event happening. I can think of a number of books that would apply to. It doesn't have to be a societal decision, but it has caused that change from that utopian society. And for me, that legacy is underwritten into the book. There are things, there are reminders of what there were, so that you are aware that there has been this shift. It's kind of in your face. This shift is present. And as DB said, the characters along the way want to get it, not necessarily back to that, but away from the direction it's going into something that resembles the societal memory of what was good or what was better.
That's a very good way of putting it. Anybody
I like
else?
that reference to like an echo of what once was, because there's going to be that societal longing or nostalgia for that. People are going to be aware that things were better at one point and they want to get back to that. So it gives you that good contrast that where they are is not what they're used to. Even if they've been this way for a long time, it's not what they want, and people remember when it was better and what they want. I think a good dystopia again ties back to reality, because readers, a lot of the time when we're reading, even if it's an escape, we're kind of also, our brains are problem solving by getting into somebody else's head. So I think a good dystopia takes like a slippery slope that we're already on and just goes further and is like, okay, what's the absolute worst that could happen here? And that's why so many of them you're seeing, especially ones written longer ago, people are like, oh my gosh, it's like they were telling the future, because sometimes in real life we do slip down that slippery slope a bit. And you do see some of these mirrored actions where in the past a writer was going, okay, well, what would be the worst that could happen here to society if this happened?
Yeah, and even I think even if it's not so close to current society, it needs to have that echo of at least the morals or the values that we currently have, so that you say, how could this have gone so wrong? They must get it back at least to a place where some basic human rights or whatever come back to the story, because otherwise it goes back to the society, right? If you don't have that attachment to what's happening to the characters and what's happening to the world, right? When you see, either when you read the news and you think, oh, the world's going to crap, or when you read the book and say, oh, this world is going to crap, you need to have some semblance of what a good world or the good outcome would be. It can be in the backstory, as Shelly said, or it can be, maybe it's not implied yet, but you kind of say, oh, they could go closer to a current society in terms of rights, in terms of, organization, economy, whatever. So I think definitely around those tracks.
I think one of the most interesting things about dystopia is that it follows, like, as you guys are saying, the cultural zeitgeist, right? So in the 50s, and I'm speaking specifically for the US, the 50s was like the atomic age, right? So we get a bunch of dystopian novels that have, what if the atomic age went nuts and, nuclear bombs everywhere. And then the 60s was counterculture. So we have novels that explore counterculture to the nth degree, and then the 70s was the rapid shift of different types of industrialization and, from farming to more city-centric life. And so we have novels like that. And then the 80s was, of course, computers. So we have things like Neuromancer, that explore what if computers, went nuts. And then the 90s, we have the internet. And then the aughts, now we have the intelligence and social media novels. So I always found that interesting, because people are living this history right now. And so, of course, authors want to take that and to explore that in a fantasy setting and take it and, give a warning, as it were. Yeah, that's why I think dystopian novels are always so important, because as Shelly said, they come back and, oh my gosh, that was telling the future. The reflection of things like The Handmaid's Tale. That's been very, very important, because the cultural things are going around that right now. Oh, who we lose? Oh, we lost Shelly. Okay. Yeah, she said her internet should be right back.
Yeah. I agree
And
with
I
that,
think what you
Beth.
said, yeah.
Sorry.
Go
ahead.
I think what you said, Beth, is interesting, because if we think about it, probably the proportion historically of like utopian to dystopian stories is like one utopian book and then 100 dystopian ones, right? And I think as history goes on, I think it's harder to picture utopia than to picture dystopia, right? It's harder to think of the perfect outcome, and it's a lot easier to think about all the things that could go wrong as society progresses. As you mentioned, per decade you have new fears and new things coming up that give you fertile ground for dystopia, but it makes it harder for utopia too, probably.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also the brain uses everything you take in to problem solve. And when we're reading, whether it's fiction or not, your brain is always like, okay, how do I solve problems? If I was in someone else's shoes, how do they solve problems? So a lot of times people that gravitate towards dystopia, it's your brain is putting itself in someone else's shoes, not realizing that it's fictional, and being like, okay, if things did really get awful for me, what are some hints about how I would survive this? And that's why fiction, people that read fiction tend to be more empathetic too, because you put yourself in so many different people's shoes that are unlike you, that you're getting used to thinking outside of your own head too. So it's interesting how your most basic instincts, which are just like survival skills, come into everything that you do and build you as a human being, because your brain doesn't realize what you're reading is fictional. Even if you logically realize it, it's always going, okay, if things got this bad, if I was in The Handmaid's Tale, could I get out of this? What did the main character in this book do to get out of this? Is give your brain some reassurances that it's problem solving, even if it's not actually the real world.
I actually find dystopia to be kind of stressful in that way. Like during the pandemic.
I wouldn't survive. I'd be done for right at the start of every dystopia.
Cardio.
Dead.
During the pandemic, I don't know what it was about the pandemic, but I got like 50 books to review that had like a plague bent to them, and all I wanted was like fluffy bunnies.
That's when cozy fantasy kind of has a resurgence.
Interestingly, Black Hind had the bit that kind of the small piece that's missing is that bit that logic of the heat and the antibiotic resistance, and that basically a large part of humanity was wiped out as part of that, as well as the global warming that then funds. And I had started writing it just before everything, and I was like, I cannot put out a book that has that bit in it, so I'm going to quietly remove that plague aspect. Well, say, because it wasn't plague in the same respect, but just that lack of antibiotic of use being that kind of turning point that people, and I was like, no, let's just quietly leave that out and let global warming alone have done the job, because there's enough going on of plague-like things in the world right now. So, yeah.
I remember. Go ahead, Shelly. I remember when I was living in Portland, I started trying to read Dies the Fire. Has anybody read the Dystopia Dies the Fire series? It's a very interesting concept and very well executed. Apparently there is some sort of like sunburst or whatever that knocks out the ability of electronics to work and gas to work, So it knocks out society completely. Planes fall from the sky and stuff. And it takes place in Portland. And I was living in Portland. And it was very accurate to Portland. I'm like, It's a very good series, though, if anybody wants to read it. It's an extremely good series, but very stressful. So what are everybody's favorite dystopian novels or short stories?
There are some great short stories. I think you don't think of it immediately, but there's probably a lot of great short stories. I think one that I liked, I don't know if it's my favorite yet, but The Year of the Flood by
it's
sorry.
I
got my tongue. The Handmaid's Tale author.
Audience.
Margaret?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I believe it was.
Yeah. Sorry, I got a brain fart. The Year of the Flood is a pretty good one. She also has another one. It's called Mad Adam. It's kind of a duology or from different perspectives, but has to do with the end of the world due to that you don't know if it's climate change plus some virus plus something whatever, but it's more on the personal side and not so much on the societal changes and all that. But it's pretty interesting as far as dystopian goes. And then probably my favorite one is 1984, just because it was very strong in that period of time, and it was a very clear vision of what fascism would turn out to be. And I think it's one of the great examples of dystopian fantasy or sci-fi, whatever.
To be able to
I think it's fantasy now because you can't say it's really sci-fi.
Dee, what about you?
Well, the idea of picking a favorite book fills me with utter anxiety. So I'm not going to pick a favorite, but an important dystopian series for me, which is something I don't think I've ever heard anyone else speak about. The Amtrak Wars by Patrick Tilley. Does anybody know that series?
Mhm.
No.
But I will now.
Yes, yeah. It was the first experience of a kind of Dances with Wolves, Avatar type kind of societal split, where the kind of there's the military world, and then there's the kind of pagan living in the nature, and they clash. And it was many years ago that I read it, but it was absolutely sort of transformative for the world. Could become anything given enough time. It could change into anything. And more modern, I would be talking Dark Tower, but that's my roots in Dystopia.
I actually have a Dark Tower shirt. I could have put on my Dark Tower shirt. I'm wearing my Omelus shirt instead. Dark Tower shirt. Shelly, what about?
Oh, I've got a whole list. I'll try and keep it narrow because I'm the same. I can't pick a favorite.
It's hard to pick. It's a terrible question.
Classic
Sorry.
one we've already talked about is Margaret Atwood, Handmaid's Tale. That one's pretty classic. I'm going to shout out some other fellow Canadians as well. I like The Annual Migration of Clouds by Premi Mohammed.
Premi Mohammed, yeah.
Premi does good work.
Yeah.
Wab Rice, Moon of the Crested Snow is another cool one because it's quite near future dystopian, and you never really find out what went wrong because they're so isolated where they live that they just know the world ended, but they're not quite sure how. And another one that I really liked was, and a kind of edge of dystopian, The Wall by Gautam Bhatia, and it's all just about this walled off city, and they were walled off at some point and they're totally self-sufficient, but it's really political and things aren't going well in the city, and people are starting to suspect that maybe the walls don't need to be up anymore and they're trapped in this city for some reason.
So underrated too. That book is so underrated, and he's such a great guy. Yeah. Jenny, what about you?
We're talking short stories. I think it probably fits in there. Good Hunting by Ken Liu. The robot, the one that's done in, I think it was part of Love, Death and Robots. They turned it into a TV episode. I prefer the story. I like the imagery of the story more than the cartoonized version. I think it was starker and a bit more disturbing. I was thinking about this earlier, and I think there's quite a lot of fantasy that I'd say is set in a very dystopian world, some of which isn't necessarily obvious until you think about that definition of what was as opposed what could be. And I would actually say that I really have favorites that are set in a world that has that split is actually the big Mark Lawrence arc, because it does have the split, but that obviously depends how much you've read. But I've been reading more, trying to read more broadly, I think, in general. And I've read Station 11 recently as well. And I thought that was really awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to bring that up.
Really
That's such a
enjoyed that.
fantastic book. Yeah.
And it has got that difference. It's that changing conditions, not necessarily caused by society, caused by something else. I mean, obviously, it's more sci-fi than fantasy. And with the brief being including dragons, I was trying to think of other stuff that was, more fantastical, but most of it has just that little bit of an aspect. Salt in the Wound, possibly as well. I think it was a Spiffbo book a couple of years ago. Benjamin, I'm trying to remember the last name. Again, that was a big fantasy shift with the rain suddenly becoming terrorizing, and the community is very much what was before and what is now, and trying to find the legacy aspects. And if we really, we can go to Legacy of the Brightwash. If you look at what is now in Legacy of the Brightwash compared to what clearly was before that technological shift.
This is what I was kind of doing some thinking on the way up to this. Quite easy to slide anything into this dystopian.
Yeah. As soon as you fit that past and future.
Yeah. I was thinking about big fan of Joe Abercrombie. I'm sure many people are. But he has that sort of way of telling a story just as one world is crumbling to be replaced by another, the kind of industry or the sort of more Western version of his stories. But he's just on the cusp of dystopian all the time, but nobody would describe him as a dystopian writer.
Yeah, I think
becomes
in,
Lord
in that
Grimdark.
case in particular, his Shattered Sea trilogy has some more dystopian elements. I'm not going to spoilerize anything, but it's more dystopian in a sense. And I forgot to add my actual favorite dystopian novel, but it's like spoiler free. I'm not going to say anything, but it's Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro.
Oh, yeah.
It's a dystopian novel. It's a very good one. I'm not going to say
It's very
anything else.
difficult to read. That's a very difficult book to read.
It's difficult to get it past your chest.
Yeah, but it's the way that he describes things and stuff is so beautiful. It's such an incredible book. And here has a real good call out. Has anybody read the Kate Daniels series by Ilona Andrews? I have to agree with him. That is, it's an urban fantasy series. It is one of the best examples of the fantastical urban fantasy type world. And there's, I don't know, like 12 books now or something. And it's wonderful. It's a great series. If anybody watching wants to try their hand at urban fantasy, that's a really wonderful mix of myth and urban society. Yeah. Let's see. Let me get my questions up here. My next question I have is, what moral or philosophical questions do dystopian fantasy narratives pose about humanity's resilience and survival under extreme conditions?
I think that depends on the perspective of the person telling the story.
Yeah, it's difficult. Yeah, I think that mostly. Sorry, go ahead.
That's okay, Mars. You go.
I think that it depends on how bad is the setting, right? It may pose more philosophical questions around just bare survival, right? Instead, if it's just like slightly different world than ours, and maybe the problem is not just survival, but it's like rights or your place in society or that kind of thing, it may imply different philosophical problems. The ones I like the most are like the ones that have to do like bare survival, right? So how do people band together? What kind of society emerges when all the rules are completely gone, right? Not just one rule, not just and there's great examples of taking just one thing, changing that, and making a great story out of that. And You Never Let Me Go is one of those examples. But I tend to have a more visceral reaction to those where they just dump you into the worst case scenario, and like The Walking Dead or something like that. How would you act in a zombie apocalypse? It gives a lot of ground to think about how people relate to each other, how those bonds can be created when there's no societal rules to follow, and it's just like basic morality. Do I kill this person? Do I eat them to survive? That kind of thing. It's probably more, it's a road more traveled in terms of fiction, but I think it still has a lot of, and as time progresses, it has a lot of material to make you think about how societies organize themselves, right? If what is the way out of a situation like that? Is it like a hippie communism thing where people band together and share resources? Is it like the authoritarian regime where someone makes sure that people don't go out of the line, and because it's a better path to survival? So I think those are really interesting because they always juxtapose current politics, right? What is the better way for the future? Like it's like a very socialism inspired thing, a more fascist inspired thing, a more utopian libertarian whatever. So I think those are still interesting to me.
Shelly, were you?
Yeah.
Do you want to
I
go?
think sure. I think
Okay.
Dystopia. Dystopia, a lot of times, I think, explores, when you're talking about resiliency, I think it again explores, like, we as human beings know we have fairly short lives, and we're educated enough to know that as a species, we've had a fairly short life on this planet. So I think there's that nostalgia and longing for, like, are we resilient? We're resilient, right? We're going to bounce back from this, right? So there's that hope that you're resilient, that you can read a story that no matter how bad of situation you put these people in, people are going to bounce back, and there's going to be a good amongst that. And I think there's also that wanting to explore, if I strip society down to its bare bones, what does that look like? If I strip me down to my bare bones, who am I as a person? Am I the person I think I am? Am I going to make the choices that I thought I would make? Or if I take off this coat of rules I wear to fit into the society I live in today, would I be a different person than I think I am? So I think a lot of times it's an exploration of that.
Mm.
The interesting thing about that, like stripping down people, is that you can see like somebody's actual motivation, like who they are inside. You know, the person, your boss, might come off all nice and stuff, but put him in a situation like that, he might become a warlord. You know, you never really know. It's a very interesting thing to look into when you're reading a story. Yeah.
I think in terms of sort of skills and attributes of characters as well. So you mentioned the boss. In this day and age, you know, who knows what modern day skills that are going to get him that high paid salary that will be completely obsolete if the rules all changed, and the kind of the guy that knows how to build a wall, for example, is suddenly, his skills are valued so much more than somebody else, and society's gone upside down, and the values all change. That's what I like to explore when somebody's shaken the snow globe. What settles? What's valuable? Is money valuable anymore? Is it not? Is water the most valuable commodity? That's the stuff I love exploring in Dystopia.
Now you made me want to read a short story about some bricklayer being the most important person because he's the one that can build the wall to stop the zombies or whatever.
It's a blacksmith. A blacksmith is the most important person. You know, nails.
Someone who can make good swords in a.
An optometrist would be nice, you know.
Dentist.
There'd be a lot of us struggling.
I don't want to be stuck in the apocalypse with braces on, and I never get them off.
Oh, Jenny, go ahead.
You've got that underlying thing, just as Doobie said. If building a wall is the thing that you need the most, your power structure changes. But as a species, we kind of do like to know where we stand with each other, and different people would rise into positions of power, and how they get there, and how they push things, and how they then move the narrative from the perspective of your point of view. Is that character going to be the one who's pushing the narrative and taking the lead, which is something we see in YA more often, YA dystopia potentially, or is the character watching it and trying to stop that kind of, but you have in a vacuum someone who steps in, and quite often that story in itself can make a dystopia even worse potentially.
The novel,
not necessarily the boss, as you say. If he's soft-handed, computerized, he is not necessarily going to have those skills to get people to do what they want if he's no longer got money. If money is no longer his power, if something else is the power, something else is the currency, that's the person who's got the control.
Spreadsheets are no longer the power.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's not really all that important anymore if you don't have power, like actual physical plug-in power. The Dies the Fire series that I was mentioning, and this is exactly what you're talking about. 3 factions rise. There is a pagan group that happens to have reenactors in it that have like horses and stuff and wagons. They go one way and they set up a community and they're very successful. And then a group of people who were horse enthusiasts have a roaming horse tribe, horse riders go around and do things for people, and that's how they make their way. And then a university professor of botany takes over Portland proper and turns all the lawns into food areas, and that's another power structure that comes up. So they take their thing that they did for fun, and that thing that they did for fun becomes their whole livelihood. Or the botany professor has this set of skills that he's showing everybody. It's really a great series. What makes dystopian fantasy worlds compelling settings for exploring themes of rebellion?
I would say any world that we're talking about that's dystopian, like it needs to have like clear rules. So rules that establish, hey, this is different than what we're used to, and this is clearly a different world with a different set of morals. And when it creates that sense of, what are you going to do if you're in this world, and what's right and what's wrong? Those are the ones that are the best to me. Like, if you don't know the situation, that I think is very dystopian. And like, for instance, one of my favorite is Battle Royale, of course, like Hunger Games, those types of dystopians where it's really literally kill or be killed. And what's the right answer in that situation? Because if you follow what you normally would think is, of course, I don't want to kill somebody, well, then you're instantly dead. So those to me are some of the best ones. And doesn't necessarily, I know it doesn't relate to fantasy exactly, but like when we're talking about a dystopian world, that's what I look for.
I think also dystopia gives people permission to explore rebellion, because if you set it in a world far enough off from our own and you say, okay, here's the scrappy people that want to survive, and here is the terrible, horrible fascist government that's taken them over, and you're like, the dark side? Okay, yeah, those guys are bad. Yeah. So sometimes...
So is Star Wars dystopia then?
Truly, yeah.
Unless you're like my husband,
Space
he loves
fantasy.
the dark side. He's like, the dark side just wants authority and organization. But yeah, I think if you give evil a different enough face, and it doesn't look quite so close to home, sometimes it's easier for people to explore rebellion. And I think that's why it gets more uncomfortable when dystopia gets closer and closer and closer to our world, because like you were saying with the Portland one, it almost gets to the point where you're like, whoa, no, hang on. Like, I don't want to explore this in my world too close. Yeah.
This is around the corner from my house. This is too much.
And yet we write them in places that we know that well. And they do then cause that trauma to people who read them. Yeah.
Well, it's fine for everybody else that know Portland. It's just for the little Portlander trying to read about, stuff exploding.
And probably from what Shelly said, rebellion is more palatable if, not only the villains are clearer, but like you can compare your own beliefs in fiction versus your beliefs in reality, right? Maybe your political beliefs or whatever in reality are not so clear because truth is uncertain in these times and whatever. So you need to be contrasted with a really, really strong narrative that says this is bad. Maybe not the bad guys. Maybe the guys that worked in the Death Star, they were probably just 9-to-5 guys. They were not evil. But the society in that place, the organization society was wrong, and you end up rooting for the rebels in Star Wars. When probably you saw that in the news, you would say, "Hey, those are terrorists. They're really terrorists." That's it. So I think shifting the world and shifting all the setting has that effect of making you think about your morals in a different way, and it has a powerful effect. I always think about a great example that I love is the X-Men. So I'm a very big comic book fan, and manga fan, or whatever, like graphic novel fan. And the X-Men were really revolutionary in the '60s, and they became like a stand-in for all the minorities, right? And they are still like a stand-in for a lot of minorities, and probably that place of rebellion, plus also teaching empathy to a lot of readers. And I don't relate probably to a real world minority, but when I see like a fictional minority being mistreated in the way that poor mutants have had in the last 60 years or so, it may be able to shift your belief closer to real world minorities and real world issues. So I think the power of rebelling against the fictional world has the power of making you question your actual current world too.
A cool thing about dystopia is nobody thinks of themselves as the villain. So as Mars was saying, you can look at it and question your morals and stuff, but you can nobody thinks of themselves as a villain, so you could root for the dark side if you want to.
They're all just trying to survive by whatever means necessary.
Yeah, when there are no institutions who says what's right or what's wrong, it's like the zombie apocalypse or stuff like that, where it's more about the people and not about the zombies, right? Or not about the external event, but about what happens to people with that. The motivations, can be a lot more gray. It's like you say, okay, this guy is trying to survive. He thinks the way to make not himself, but maybe just his group or whatever survive. That means killing the other group, or that means subjugating another group or whatever. And when you think about it from that point of view, there's usually no evil, tackling bad guys, right? In that kind of fiction.
Just people being people, right? Trying to survive. That was, the Walking Dead was never really about the zombies, right? It was about the people against the people.
Yeah, totally.
And that was the interesting part of the story.
Anyway.
Yeah.
It's all about that.
Go ahead,
that moment. The moment when in Walking Dead, as an example, one person meets another that they don't know, which is something that we do every day in our everyday life. But everything's gone, so it makes absolute sense for that other person to kill you and take what you've got. So that sort of just massive amount of energy with two people colliding in that world is what it's all about. That's the magic of kind of dystopia.
And then that's where you question your own morals, right? Would I be the person that just kills the other person, or would I be the person that would,
but even
join with the other person?
If you approach that other person with the mindset of, I'm a good guy, I'm not going to kill this person, you still don't know if they're going to kill you, so you're going to have to kill them anyway. So it's like an eternal struggle, just one person meeting another.
Something so simple.
In those, the question in those cases is, do I stick to my probably outdated morals because they were from a world that is not there anymore, and probably die, or just adapt to a new world in which none of that applies, and I have to game the game. Let's say I have to hack the system to find a way in which to survive, and that means discarding old morals and adopting new ones. And I think that's a lot of like the post-apocalyptic fantasy, right? Deals a lot with that, like the Walking Dead and fallouts of the world, all the zombie, like World War Z, and a lot of things that like that have a lot to do with that, because we know that the morals, we know very well the morals of our current world and what happens if you need to abandon them. Maybe in a more like fantasy dystopia, which is you don't know the exact morals of that world, there's a lot more room for playing around with that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Another, I think, a very interesting series, if some of you in the audience like the Walking Dead, a lot of you must know this one. It's Attack on Titan. It's a Japanese manga / anime. And I think it's very grimdark, and it's very dystopian, but it's also like in a fantasy setting, and like the enemy ostensibly are like giants that eat people and keep them hidden behind the wall, because if like if the humans were not protected by that wall, they would be eaten by those titans. But the actual enemy of the series is not the titans. It's like what happens to society when they are in that like enclosed situation, and people want to get out, people want to get in, people in fight, and all the problems with the people cause the drama and cause the more deaths than the actual enemy, right? So I think that's a good example of how like the setting or the enemy may not be the enemy, but like humans and how we treat each other, right, is the actual enemy in those kind of dystopian stories, right?
Have you guys read World War Z?
Like I said.
It's one of my favorite books, and I think it's a great example of what Mars is saying. It's like little vignettes of different societies around the world having this particular problem, and how do individuals from that particular society react. You have the Japanese society have floating boats that have bound together to make like little islands of floating people. You have the military, and it's really well done. It's really fascinating, and really cool with the movie.
Yeah. It's a really good book. I think they did a very bad movie. I think when I read the book, I wanted to know a lot more. So I think that would be a great book to adapt to a series, like a Netflix series or something.
Yes.
In each chapter, you try to show different places in the world and how they react to that, because I think that the movie did not do it justice, right?
Be pricey to make, but be so good.
Yeah, and all the creativity that you see, how people would adapt. Sometimes you think, oh, if bombs fall, we are all doomed, right? Or whatever. Or if there's a zombie apocalypse, we're all doomed. And people and society is really resilient. Going back to what we talked before, I mean, we're like cockroaches. We will find a way. We'll find a way, and we will adapt and survive. And usually, fiction, maybe even behind the events. It's difficult to picture all the ways in which humanity could adapt to those things. It's like, oh, like climate change is gonna kill us all. Okay, yeah, probably we'll survive somehow, some way. We'll find different ways to live above water, below water, whatever. And I think that's really interesting, and there's a lot of things to explore there, yet in fiction.
So, bringing up zombies, why do you think right now these are so popular? I guess they've been super popular since the late 70s, but why are they so popular as a narrative device, like the big bad? What do you think that's reflective on? Yeah.
I think that assumption that the zombies have lost their mental capability in a lot of cases makes them a conscience-free target that can allow for dramatic scenes and can allow for heart-wrenching scenes if it's someone they know but they know has gone, so you get the loss twice. So you get that extra second hit of that bit. And if we're going to go completely ridiculous and go sideways here, Shaun of the Dead, he has to kill his own mother. But she's already gone. Yeah. But you take that, you've got the second layer there, but that second death is without conscience. So you can make it as bloodthirsty and as big as you want. And there is that also the terror that you could go to. So from that horror perspective, you are on the edge of conscience and on the edge of your own life, and literally one wrong move and you could be gone, but one wrong move and you've lost a friend, and then you have to kill them twice and everything else like that. So I can see from a storytelling perspective why it's there. And the fact that science has found that, hey, zombies actually kind of exist in some species, and fungus can do this to ants, and this is actually a thing that can happen, makes that extra leap to like, hey, it wouldn't take too much for a microorganism to do that to us. I mean, obviously it's going to take a bit more than that, but the theory, that science fiction aspect of it, jumping in, makes it that step. I mean, as SFF authors, we all like to explore, or people like to explore that possibility, that what if, that new bit of science that takes you that step further. And as you say, they've been around since the 70s, but there is modern stuff that you can bring to that, plus all the emotional, the extra emotional load, I think, of something like zombies. It's not something that I think, I'm a biologist, I don't want to write it because I'd probably, no.
Your head explode.
I mean, zombies are also like the ultimate villain, right? It's like man is the wolf of man, right? And I think they probably took a little of the hype from vampires. The vampires kind of died down a little bit, and then zombies kind of rose up.
Vampires are so gauche now.
Yeah, I think Twilight just killed it for like 10 years or 20 years or whatever.
I'll be back.
But
Stephen Graham Jones has a good one coming out. Buffalo Hunters.
But some zombies are also great because they fulfill that fantasy of, hey, I want to shoot my boss, right? I get to do that if he turns into a zombie. I'm completely validated in my desire. So I think it goes both ways. It's like perfect villain because it can turn you. It's also like it can turn anyone, not like a vampire who's not probably going to infect everyone because they run out of people to eat. It's mindless, not like the vampire. But I think it's also the terror of like the terror against other people. Like you said, DB said, encountering someone, you encounter someone in the woods or something like that. Like I remember there was a couple of months ago, the question of would you prefer to run into a man or a bear in the woods? And I think running into a zombie I would rather run into a zombie than running into the bear. But I think that's the perfect villain, right? It's like a mirror where we see ourselves and all the worst that humankind can do. But it's also a great fantasy villain because you can't wait to kill him. It's like, okay, I want to get rid of those great zombies. You don't feel the guilt of killing that other human being unless it's your mom. It's like it fulfills that power fantasy of, oh, I would really like to drop a bomb on that group of people, and since they're zombies, I can do that. And so I think it works both ways as a power fantasy. Sorry, I dropped my guitar. As a power fantasy and also as a great villain.
Yeah, the same enemy can. Sorry, go for it.
I was just going to add, like J.E. was saying about there's that fear of what things are real around us, where all of this kind of stems from, like when people are trying to explain something they couldn't figure out, is like rabies, like vampirism, werewolves, zombies. It was all like you get bitten by something and then you turn into something inhuman after that. And it's fascinating because that's a disease that's been around forever. It's been described since Roman times, and it's interesting to see how people use myth and storytelling to be like roll off of that and explain something that's happening in their world that at that point they didn't understand.
Cujo. You guys, Cujo. Absolutely terrifying.
And zombies used to be like a voodoo curse or whatever, right? Before like biological sci-fi explanations, they used to be cursed, like like mummies or vampires. We adapt our villains to technology also.
We're actually getting skinny on time here. We got 5.5 minutes left. Do we have any questions from the audience? No? Does anybody have
I know,
anything else they
questions,
want to
but
talk about?
there are some
Let's see.
good recommendations on the chat for books. So
Yeah, there's some great things in the chat. Amtrak Wars is very, very underrated and unknown. Yeah.
There's
I have a
another
whole
another
list.
person.
Yep, Mihir's very well read. He loves dystopia, so he has a whole list of books that he. What's the one dystopian world that the authors would like to be part of?
but you mean part of if I'm on the top of the food chain or at the bottom? Because it depends. I mean, dystopian worlds are great if you are the one hoarding all the money or whatever resources. Not that good.
The one where I'm in a
Nuts.
cabin in the mountains all by myself with plentiful gardens and I'm a hermit and nobody else is ever coming.
Like you're like in Antarctica and there's a zombie apocalypse and you never find out. You're just watching TV.
I can't actually think
I
of
think-
any that I want to be a
Cabin
part of.
next door,
and-
I think. I'll take the cabin next door, but we won't talk just in case we pass anything to each other. We'll wave from a distance and throw carrots occasionally.
Hold up signs.
I'm
You
down
know,
with
like-
it.
Yeah.
Whiteboard. Good morning.
I think an interesting one is there's a comic book also called Why the Last Man, which is like every man
I
on
love
Earth
that
dies
series. Yeah.
except one guy that was survived because of his monkey bit him or whatever. I think that series is really interesting from the point of view of the guy. It's not like a misogynistic fantasy or whatever. It's interesting to see what happens with a completely female society, and it explores and it kind of plays with. It's not that like just because the world is dominated by women, it's all gonna be happy, go lucky, and love and whatever. They will fall into some of the same traps and behaviors as the patriarchy or whatever is setting. But I think it would be interesting to explore.
So what you're
The
saying is
fun
you want to
thing
be the
about
last man surrounded by women.
Yeah, that's the whole idea, right? That's kind of the fantasy.
You asked where we
Right.
wanted to be. That was Mars done.
And it doesn't work out. It doesn't quite work out like you would think it would.
No, probably not. Probably they would just use you as as whatever. But I think it would be an interesting thing. Just to be the last one in the world. I think it's interesting. Oh, 7 Eyes. I didn't know about that one. That they're pointing out.
Neil Stevenson writes really great dystopia. Snow Crash was one of the first dystopian books that I read, and he actually coined, I think, Avatar as an image.
He coined
Yeah,
a lot of words.
Right.
Yeah.
Like I think Avatar, probably like some other cyberpunk concepts.
It's amazing how
We're on the
influential
verge
a
of
dystopian
Terminator and
idea.
Terminator 2, anyway.
It's crazy how influential a dystopian novel can be on society at large. Like, we're still talking about 1984, and that was written in the 40s, and it's still important. It's still something that we're dealing with, ideas that we're dealing with. Or Fahrenheit 451, about book banning and book burning and stuff. It's still important. Quite longevity.
Yeah, totally.
Probably
I think
what
about the impact the Matrix had when it came out, right? It was great because it exposed people to philosophical questions about free will and determinism and all that the regular mainstream movie-going audience was not really thinking about, right? But it was stuff that was in a lot of books, but not in a lot of movies, right? And I think that one made a great impact. It probably lost a bit of impact in the last couple of years, but it was
the last one not so much.
Yeah, it
Forget
kind of
the last
took,
one even exists.
took the shine off the right.
I think another a thing with Dystopia that's attractive too is that you can make your bad guys really cool. Like they're really cool, scary bad guys, as opposed to like real life, and you're like, oh, I wish the bad guys in real life were cooler than this because they kind of suck.
Yeah.
Just some dude down the street.
Yeah, at least they can dress up better, right? And they have cool poses and cool stuff, cool gadgets.
I mean, some of the near future, you say some of the near future dystopia. I mean, first time I read Tad Williams' Otherland. I read that at a point where I had been playing significant amounts of online games. And it absolutely fried my brain. I found it, because it's so close to that mark, that border of like, oh, we could actually end up there in a slightly different way. And obviously I believe that's now being adapted for television.
Oh, is it?
So
that's cool.
Yeah, the bad thing is some of the
there's some weird bad guys in that, and there's all the implants and the tech and the stuff like that as Amir said, there's so much stuff in it that is now present. It was right on the verge for me at the time I read it, and now you look at it and you're like, ooh. And so I mean, I think those near future dystopias, hooded elephant in the room, aren't we? Let's be honest, with the handmaid and all the rest of it. But those near future dystopias set in our world are quite scary, even when you stick a fantasy element in. You almost need the fantasy element as a, throw a dragon in as a bit of a salve to take that edge away of the kind of total fear that it's right close to where you be. It allows us to explore something so very present and right on the cusp.
Very terrifying.
And yet the safety of throwing a dragon at it, the safety of just changing the world enough that you're not sitting there going, this is what's about to happen. You're kind of going, and the fairy flew in and they dropped a load of dust and everybody fell asleep. And then they all woke up and but I know it's a really ridiculous example, but you know what I mean? It takes that edge slightly to allow us to explore that without quite being so uncomfortable. And that makes other people read these, that allows other people to read these books and explore the ideas through fantasy that maybe sci-fi is that much closer to reality sometimes. So throwing it in through the fantasy route brings them to a slightly different audience that maybe haven't thought these ideas in the same way before.
That's pretty much the principle about why I write, because I can't write about real world because it's too prickly. I need to put it in a spaceship or put it somewhere else and make it a bit safe to fit in the brain before I can explore it.
And when you try to write more realistic stuff, usually the world just is way crazier than your idea sometimes.
Yeah, way scarier.
you cannot really predict stuff. I had some speculative books in my works in progress, and you leave it for 6 months and reality just went past you. It's like writing near future is very difficult because it's always changing. And we should be careful about not giving too many dystopian ideas to like entrepreneurs and people who want to make stuff like Ready Player One
how can
reality.
I make some money off of this?
It's like let's save some of the worst ideas. And not use
Stroking
them.
their evil villain beard,
Yeah, totally.
So for the dystopian genre, where do you think it's going? Like, the cultural zeitgeist is going on right now. Where do you think, what's the next thing that it's going to be addressing? It's going to become popular because we have been through plague recently.
And where in the world you are.
That's true. It's different. This is very Western centric discussion. Yeah.
If I knew, I would make a lot of money with my next book. So I don't know where it's going.
I think social media, how influential social media is, I think, because that's kind of a
There
universal.
are already a couple of interesting books by Dave Eggers, The Circle and The
Oh, I know
Society,
The
I think
Circle.
they are called.
Yeah.
I think those are interesting because I think those are kind of the first to explore all the bad parts. But I think it's not going far enough. I think we need more in terms of how society is being fragmented and kind of like the regular Western democratic society is being destroyed by these kind of things that are scarier than like Darth Vader or a regular villain. I think we probably need more of that just to make people, rebel a little bit more in real life against those control mechanisms. That when you tell people, hey, you should quit social media because of this or that, they say no, but I need to keep in touch with blah blah blah. I think we need more fiction, like exposing that in a sense, right? And I think more people will open their eyes to that because I think we've seen enough of like climate change fiction or like disaster fiction in the common sense, but I think we need more like societal disaster fiction.
I think it might be an uptick on like the loss of self kind of thing. Like I think a lot of people right now are reeling and they don't feel like themselves. So some of that loss of autonomy, loss of mind, loss of connection to other people, where people feel like you're losing yourself in the big world, even if society might still be functioning. People are kind of flying apart like molecules.
Yeah, totally.
I think you're right. But much like in COVID, like Beth said earlier, I think depending on where the author is writing and where the readers are buying from, you may find that dystopia moves away from societal comment because it's too close to comfort. It's not something people will want to sit down and read in the same way that people didn't necessarily want to read really dark stuff in the middle of the pandemic. If things in society are too uncomfortable and people are going to want something entirely different, this dystopia may change completely. I mean, if we're talking, we've got dystopian fantasy as a thing, it could be something completely outside of our current things because
Loser.
Gone.
Oh, I guess. Yeah, I think she's gone.
I think there might be.
She's right.
Thinking,
go ahead, DB.
I was going to say about the. I don't know if anybody's seen the movie. Is it the Creator? About the robots and the AI, and I just found that really kind of. Like, obviously, we're all thinking about AI and we're all thinking about machines making decisions for us and taking art away from us and all that stuff. But that was kind of like on the other side of that, not the opposite side, through that argument, and to the other side where eventually machines maybe do learn emotion and do have sort of grief and connections to other robots. And I don't know if that's the way it's going to go, but that was definitely an eye-opener of where technology could go wrong, but then be reborn again on the other side of it.
Mars?
No, totally. From what DB said, I think dystopian showing how people are becoming more machine-like and losing their self, like Shelly said, while machines may get more human-like. I mean, that I think that's an interesting place to go, and also probably we'll see a resurgence in like extraterrestrials and stuff like that. Just because when there's like a lot of societal like upheaval and all that, people tend to look for like a new threat, a new enemy, or maybe someone to save us from ourselves. So I think there may be an uptick in that. I should start fighting some of that.
Coming next from Mars.
Alien dentists from outer space.
Alien dentists.
Dystopian alien with horses who can garden.
Nobody likes a toothache. I always think like misinformation. So, with the online media and with things like Facebook and Twitter and stuff, they wag the dog, like whole wars that are complete misinformation and just using public opinion to control society and stuff. I mean, that's probably too close to home right now, but I think that's sort of the direction I can see dystopia going with the cultural zeitgeist, because it is something that we are dealing with because of social media generally.
And we are still to it. We kind of think we know that the media are trying to hook us and manipulate us, but actually we are still, as a species, we are suckered in by everything that we're told.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think there's an interesting thing there. Do you remember Asimov's Foundation books were about like psychohistory, which was like a discipline that allowed to predict the future based on massive societal. It was like big data and AI before there was anything like that. It's like predicting the future based on how society would move, and then what happens when, like, there's a butterfly effect. Something that is not predicted. Some person acts with free will in that sense, and maybe something along those lines of how societies are being shaped and manipulated, and how you could have like warring like entities or powers trying to wage war, as you said, through proxy, through people, and through manipulation. I think that would be an interesting way in which fantasy could move on from like master strategists on the battlefield versus master manipulators in a more digital way. I think that would be really cool. I'm getting a lot of ideas from these guys. I'm gonna write down a couple.
You couple that with AI. You couple that with AI, and we're just screwed. Because AI is advancing so quickly, they can make videos that look. It's difficult to tell the difference. Yeah. And if you want to, do a proxy war and you can have video, and who's to know?
Yeah, feed in the misinformation.
Yeah, who's to know?
So what if we get the misinformation that we are in a zombie apocalypse? How many people would actually go out and start hacking people down just because we've been told that's where we are?
Oh yeah, that's a very good question. You get enough people thinking about it, and then you get
something like that. Actually happened in Africa, where there was a big manipulation campaign by one ethnicity on Facebook, and they ended up fomenting or promoting the killing of another ethnic group. So it's not that far off. It's not that if you convince people that there's like an invisible virus, and people look just like you, but they're it's not that crazy. There's a lot of people who believe that like right now, and people who are just looking for an excuse to go out and fulfill their zombie fantasies. Really.
That would be an opportunity for some people. Oh, I don't like their yard. There must be zombies.
Yeah.
Someone not even waiting for that. Someone not even waiting for that. For that excuse.
Mars is going to take out his boss.
Take out your boss.
Yeah.
She's lucky that I like her.
Bosses are terrible usually. So when you're writing a dystopian fantasy, how does an author balance hope with the bleakness of it? How would a writer balance that? Because that's very important. Otherwise, it's just nihilism, and it's not really fun to read.
Yeah.
No.
Victories.
Everybody dies. There's no hope. The end.
Yeah.
More victories.
I was thinking
more
about that
death.
question when you sent that that question yesterday to us. I was thinking about that about my own book, and I think the important thing for me, because I had a very unlikable main character. So just from the first paragraph, he's gonna do stuff that you're not gonna really like. So I needed right there on the first chapter, second chapter, I needed to introduce like a spark of hope that that person can change, but also that the world could change. Otherwise, you can fall into that trap of alienating the reader, because you need to identify if it's an anti-hero or even if it's a villain, an outright villain. You need to know that they have human elements or that they can be redeemed in some way. So you need to introduce hope for that world and that setting to change. Maybe you don't know how, but you need to just put that out there, that there's some possibility of change. Otherwise, it's like the worst of the grim dark, right? It's like dark for dark's sake,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it ends up being like torture, right? It's like the reason I don't like those drug dealer shows and stuff like that. It's because it's completely dark all the time. How do you redeem drug dealer, killer, rapist, all of that together? It's all unremittingly dour, right? So I think in books, even if they are dark, you're going to look for that, for a chance to. It's not like a biopic. It's not like a series where okay, that guy is bad. He did bad things. He's going to be bad from chapter 1 to chapter 50, right? I think in your books you want to see that progression, and if it's fiction, you want to see characters that are allowed to change.
Yeah.
I've been told by my editor that I have to balance it scene by scene, because sometimes I'll get writing stuff and I'm not good at pacing to start with, and it'll get to a point where they're like, too much, Shelly. Like, dial it back a bit. You got to give this person a moment of peace. You got to give them, like Jay said, a bit of a victory, because otherwise it's going to be like people are just going to shut off the news. They're going to put down the book. Like, yes, people are reading Dystopia to figure out how to problem solve and to escape from their lives into something that's not quite like their lives, but they are looking for that hope too. We always are looking for that hope, and if you don't give them enough hope scene by scene, if there's not those moments of rest to contrast how terrible this world is, then it just gets to be too much. There is no contrast. You're like, okay, right, I get it. It's an awful, horrible world, and I don't want to read this anymore.
And you put down the book.
It doesn't
and you're
have
done.
to be in that one perspective. If you're writing multi-POV and one is going through the mill, then that hope can come from another perspective. Someone who can be headed that way can, and as you say, that respite. Otherwise, that intensity, and you're like, I need to breathe as a reader, and it can be too much. There needs to be the pacing, not just within that one narrative, but across the story, to give the reader the time also to reflect on things. If you're putting really complex things in there as part of your dystopia, to give them that moment of reflection, and the characters the moments of reflection, the moments that they need, their brief moments of quiet and calm to deal with the absolute storm you've thrown their way. Because we would, unless, I mean, most people, if they keep going and going and going and going without that break, will go to survive, but they will probably crash and hit a wall. If you want your characters to make it to the end, they need something more than survival.
It's a marathon.
They need that. It's a marathon, and they need something more than survival. They need the chance of, even if it's a small thing. I mean, Station 11, that ending, that little hint, that end. I know it doesn't end with everything finished, but it ends with the hope. But there are moments through the way where you see, oh, okay, that might not be so bad, little things. If you want to keep it heavy, you want to keep it dark, it doesn't have to be a massive win, but there has. And Mars was saying about if you're writing it from the bad guy, and the line in the sand gives you both tension and gives the reader that, oh, I don't think they'll ever cross that line. Okay, they won't cross that line. That's their limit. If you choose as an author to then break that trust with the reader, break their heart, fine, later. But in the moment coming up to that, they've got that kind of mental piece that is a line this character's not going to cross. They are awful, they're hideous, but maybe they do have a limit. And if you're writing great characters right down the middle, do they have something that is their moral focus? It may not be what the rest of the dystopian society sees as good or wrong or whatever those new rules are, but do they have something that to them is a moral focus that they are working towards? Are they making small gains towards that, regardless of whether society sees it that way or not? But small wins, or sometimes a big one chucked in the middle before everything hits the fan again. But
but it's very interesting what you
always
because
down.
a lot of like modern fiction, it's like the pacing is a lot like that. It's more regular. And if you look back, I'm going to put, because it always ends up in all my panel discussions, the Lord of the Rings. If you think about it from the point of view of the elves, it's a dystopia. Like it's like the world is really past their prime. Most of the population has been wiped out and whatever. But what Shelly said about the rest, it's like that. It's very important because when you actually read the book, it has 1 or 2 or 3 chapters in a row that are very action filled, and then you have 1 or 2 which are like the rest, where hope comes back, right? When they go to Rivendell or Lothlorien or Gondor or whatever. So it's like you have those small islands of hope, and in that book, hope is really, really a big part of it. Like the main message of that is hope. But the world is really, when you think about it, objectively, it's really dark. There's not much hope for mankind or for the other races, but hope is there, and it kind of comes up all the time in those little rests. And I don't see that enough in current fantasy. It's like all dark all the time, just to up the ante, just because maybe hope is seen as kind of corny. But I'm one of the ones that can go there and be a little corny when you need to, because I think otherwise, you risk becoming too negative and too dour.
And the bottom line is we're trying to entertain people, no matter how dark the story gets, and no matter how realistic this main character who's a torturer, whatever it might be, we are trying to entertain people. So you kind of got to bring them along with you.
Yeah.
When I'm looking at stories for putting the magazine together, Mars, that's something that I look for. I look for like the one ray of hope. It can be a completely black, dirty world, but there has to be one little shining thing sticking out for the audience to grab a hold to. Otherwise, it's not a fun thing to read. It's torture porn, or
Exactly.
Yeah, you gotta have something.
It's torture to read through, and it's just for people who really enjoy the very niche stories that are very, very dark and very dour.
Which is fine.
The rest of us, we need, the rest of us need a little hope once in a while to keep reading, right?
Even if it's just the perspective of the protagonist, doing the right thing for the wrong reasons or the wrong thing for the right reasons. You have to be able to at least understand that particular protagonist and hold on to that, because he can be a complete jackass, but you understand him and you can go along on this journey with them.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. Well, we actually are running out of time, so I wanted to take a moment and have everybody talk a little bit about where they can be found and what cool things that they're working on, and Shelly, do you want to go first?
Sure. I'm kind of all over the map with speculative fiction. So I've just wrapped up with my horror series trilogy. It's called the Darkwalker series, and it's all about well, picture like Narnia if it was a horror. So there's doors to other worlds, but it's no fairy tale. So I'm excited to wrap that one up. And I'm in the middle of writing the third book in my Canadian post-apocalypse sci-fi. That one is actually about solar flares, knocked out the power grids, and what people to do to survive if you had to burn all your books because you had to burn everything to stay warm.
Oh, blasphemy. Blasphemy.
Yeah. And yeah, that
warm.
one is the one I'm in the middle of writing now. And so all of my stuff is darker stuff, regardless of what genre it is, but with hope. Grim hope.
Grim
And
hope.
yeah, I can be found across most social media if you look up Shelly Campbell author, and my website has all of my links as well, and that's Shelly Campbell author and art.com.
DB, what about you?
I'm hoping this year is the year that the next book comes out, the next Wayward Worlds book, and also I'm writing a novella set in space, very different, but very exciting. I'm kind of writing that by accident, to be totally honest. And I'm going to be putting a lot more energy into the Beardsman podcast. So we've got some kind of
love
live
that podcast, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you very
It's
much.
so fun to listen to.
So
Do I
there's
need
gonna
to let my beard grow to be invited or something? I can do that, but just
it helps, but we can still invite you without a beard, but it does help.
I can put a fake one on.
Yeah, that'll do. Yeah, Mr. List is in the chat there. Brilliant. So we're going to be doing some more live RPG stuff and some more panel chats, and yeah, that's just about it. That's enough to keep me going. I'm on the same socials. I'm on everything that you could possibly imagine, trying to get out there. So come and find me.
Mars, what about you?
Well, I have like an entire trilogy out. Like, this is book 1, Trials of the Tyrant God. It's very grimdark. It's a mix of like a Sanderson world, but through the lens of like this Malazan series. So it's like grimdark, but with cool powers and a cool spin on magic systems and all that. So I think it's very interesting. And then I have something completely different, which is this standalone novel, which is like I call it like it's the love child of Ursula Le Guin and Asimov. So it's kind of like a utopian sci-fi that's not very common right now. That kind of style. So, but this is like my love child. And they can find me. My website is marsjefferson.com. I'm mostly on Blue Sky now. I left the X because of reasons. You can also find me on Facebook. I'm on the Grimdark group there in Facebook. I only use it to interact with that group because I think it's a really cool one. I mostly spend my time on Reddit arguing with random people because that's what I do. But you can find me on any of these.
Jenny, what about you?
Socially wise, probably most likely to find me on Blue Sky these days. My website is jehannaford.com. I am working on the last book in the Illyrian Gates trilogy. So I am working on the Watcher's Gates, with the entire aim of making people bawl their eyes out by the end. So yay. And probably never talk to me again. At least in some people won't ever talk to me again by the time I finish. And I am also quietly working on something much darker, faster, and quite a bit grimmer, which is called Swarm Rest, where I am writing the bad guy as well as the good guy. But neither of them are quite the way around that they appear. You know, good guy's a thief. So that one is making progress. It's kind of sort of semi on the burner because I do realize that with Spiffbo going on, I probably should finish the Gates trilogy. So I am trying to get that done at the moment. And at some point, probably next year, I might chuck out another Two Chasms novella. Maybe one fairly dark one. I like to play with the experiments in novellas, and I've been toying with the idea of writing a very dark one. So yeah, sorry for anyone who thinks all the two chasms are going to be cute and fluffy. That's not the way they're going. They're all going to be different.
I go the other way. When I'm writing something really dark, I need to do like a very light novella or something that gets me out of that dark mindset, because otherwise I would write
That's what Unfamiliar. That was what Unfamiliar was for. It's light and fluffy and cute and everything.
I have like a cozy fantasy that I'm slowly getting through, and it's not my genre at all, but I needed to do something completely different. And I found an angle that I liked, so I'm actually trying something out.
You can find me on pretty much any social media out there. I was very active on X. I'm still there, although I've got to be honest, it's turning into quite the cesspool.
It was always a cesspool. It's just that.
Yeah, but we are past always a cesspool. We are a new territory. I really like Blue Sky, so I'm on Blue Sky quite a lot. I'm trying to be more active on Reddit, but I find Reddit to be a bit scary. So don't tend to go on Reddit much. Our fantasy is kind of scary. And of course,
there's a grimdark group now on Reddit also, so you can join that.
I know we did an AMA. We did an AMA not too long ago.
The one you would mark.
Yeah. So, an editor of Grimdark magazine. There's always the quarterly issues that are coming out. I'm always putting those together. And of course, I own Before We Go blog. You know, Spiffbo and everything else. Yes, my baby. Kind of split in different pieces lately, but yeah. So you're gonna find me
on your plate.
Huh?
No, a lot of things on your plate.
Yeah, always. Oh, there's always a lot of stuff going on. I like to keep busy.
You do great work also. I got some great reviews from Grimdark magazine and from Before We Go, so thanks a lot for the work you do.
Yeah, thanks. We have a really great team. Well, we have two really great teams, and it's an honor to be able to review and stuff. Okay, well, I want to thank the audience for coming. There's a lot of beardsmen here. Yeah, I want to thank the audience for coming and out to discuss Dystopia, a real cheery topic. And so thank you, and thank you to our wonderful panel. And I hope everybody has a really great day. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks. Very nice to meet you guys.